Hi all, welcome to Jumpstart Pack Workshop 4 at Baachu Scribble. Hope your family and everybody around you are safe and healthy. As progressed, we are in Workshop 4, which means we cover sales prospecting and sales pipeline management in our first session last week, Tuesday. Then we had sales presentations, followed by sales objections and deal closure. And today we are in sales negotiation and follow-up. Even though the subject today is called sales negotiation, you would note that this is applicable in pretty much at any walk of life. So sales negotiation, follow-up, very closely related to lessons learned, but this is in a live spoken manner. So let's move on. So where are we? We touched prospecting, we did the preparation, we presented, and there was few objections. We handled the objections, then we had few questions, and we closed the deal. But in the closing the deal, we had few more ways. You could have finally signed off the deal, or the deal might be slightly delayed here and there. But either way, you are in a place now where you're starting to negotiate the deal. So negotiation could happen all the way from the very beginning to the very end, and even after the contract gets signed. So let's start and dwell deeper on this most important part of the sales process. So what is negotiation? Negotiation is part of selling continuum. As I mentioned, it could happen anywhere in the selling cycle, and it involves a process of agreeing the terms of the deal. So the terms of the deal might be very different from your side, from the very different to the other person who's opposite to you, or the company that you are planning to negotiate with. It could be a partner, it could be a client, or it could be anybody else, an individual who you want to work with on a consulting level. You never know. So either way, negotiation is a process of agreeing the terms of the deal. So at every form of sales and BD involves some form of negotiation. So why do you negotiate? Why is effective negotiation important? Number one, it improves profitability. So if you're running a company, negotiation is aimed to improve the bottom line of your company. So it improves the profitability, and it helps you to compete on value rather than the price, and it enhances the customer's perception of your company. If you accept anything straight away, it straight away puts the perception down. So it's very important. So even if it's something simple, it's important to have something that you are negotiating with the client. But and the characteristics of negotiation depends on the complexity of the deal that you're negotiating. So moving on. Again, following the same principle, as I mentioned, if you are there to win a deal for X amount of revenue, negotiation helps you to gain more. You're upselling more to get more out of your deal. Or if somebody is telling you, hey, you know what, the market is down, so we want you to give more discounts to your products and services. Again, negotiation is a tool to help you to avoid it, or at least to mitigate it to a certain extent. And then the most important case, negotiation is also a very important tool that helps you to improve your win-loss ratio. So where are we? What are the key negotiation styles? There are multiple forms of negotiation. If you bucket them into two parts, one is hard negotiator, full on, and one is a soft negotiator. If you work with a lawyer or a law firm, solicitor, then they are most probably will be hard negotiators, because all they do is look into the contracts and say, according to the contract, this is not going to be possible. According to the contracts, we might have a leeway. So it's hard negotiation. So it's hard line, as the word says. It's about who's more stronger in personality than the other person, and it's a test of will. You would find hard to just keep with it. Some negotiation goes on for hours, in some cases even days. As you can imagine, the negotiations of countries, imagine the complexity of those. Either way, hard negotiation is one form. Soft negotiation, more or less, you know what, I'm happy to give it up because it's a long-term engagement, and I want to have the relationship in a continued manner. What that meant is you concede pretty readily, because you want to avoid any personal conflict and you wish for an amicable resolution. Between these two styles, between hard and soft, is what we call a principal negotiator, which means these are the 5 things that you have to get it, and these are the 5 things that you can give away. Only you know what your 5 things are, and you are just guessing, or you are just having a plan. Okay, I'm going to give up these things so that the other person also considers it as win. And if there is anything in between which you believe it's important for you, and if that person also believes the same thing is important for you, that's where negotiation kicks in, and it's between hard and soft. Okay, so let's moving on. What does the hard negotiator do? The hard negotiator do few things. It's the characteristics of him or her. Mostly him, but you never know. It could also be a her. So what happens is straight away the opposite party is being considered as an adversary rather than actually as someone who's on the negotiation table. The important thing is the goal is victory. I mean, they're negotiating to win. They don't care about you. They are hard on the problem and the people who are coming to negotiate with. So they just corner you to a side where you are forced to give up your terms so that they can close it and they can work on. They make threats, they try to walk off, they try to do anything and everything. It's pretty much kind of a manipulation. And then they will find a way that they find some gaps between your teams before a solution and to build some distrust. Most importantly, they will just try to win the contest and apply a lot of pressure. In your life, in your career, have you seen this sort of thing? In a very simple way, you might go into a market, you are going to buy a car, you are doing anything, you will always find somebody who's a hard negotiator. The recruitment, if somebody will say, hey, you know what, we can only get you X amount of salary. It's hard, soft, it could be anywhere. In your life, just to reflect who are the people who have been hard negotiators and how do they approach it? Why do you think they are hard negotiators? Use this as a reflective session. Even in your own company, who negotiates hard? Mainly, that's why we have something called commercial team or legal counsels or law teams. All these stuff means they are hardcore negotiators. That's what we are paid to do them. But anybody else who's also good at doing them, what are the characteristics of them? Understand their style. So the soft negotiators on the other side, they go personal friends. So they approach people as friends because they are in it for long term, and they make concessions to foster the relationship. They trust others, soft on people and the problem, and they give offers even before they ask, and they change the position easily, which means this is the scope that's been agreed. If somebody comes on the other side and say, hey, you know what, can we do this? By the way, we are not going to pay you more for that. Most of the time, if a friendly negotiator does it, he or she will agree, and you pretty much disclose the bottom line. Here we go, guys. You know what, we are only going to make 5% margin on this. I don't think we can go any lower than that. And you don't want to contest on will, and you will never give pressure. More or less, you will yield pressure. Imagine if a hard negotiator sits opposite to a soft negotiator, they will bulldoze you all the way. Or if 2 soft negotiators sit down on the table, it'll be very interesting thing. It's like, don't worry, I will pay. No, you pay. That never happens in real life, but it's more or less a friendly thing. So soft is one side of the coin and hard is on the other side, and we need to have something in between. And that's what we call as a principal negotiation. You will heard the term win-win. So it depends, and sometimes if you're working for a multinational company, this is where it becomes even more interesting, because some countries have a very strong culture of negotiation, like Germany, the Dutch, the Americans. They're very straight and very hardcore in the way they negotiate, because that's how they approach. It's their style. Whereas on the Asian side, it could be hardcore or it could be softer depending on the culture that they are from. So again, culture plays a bigger role, and win-win is a general principle that tried to be used. You know what? We both have to win on this deal to have a long-term relationship, plus to make the contract work, because me on my own cannot succeed without you. So what's the line in between that we could both be happy? So What these guys do, that is, they do four key things. Number one is they separate people from the problem. What happens is he or she who's on the negotiation side, regardless of who they are, what they do, how they approach their own style, they try to separate the people and their person style, and they focus on the problem, which is to strike the deal. It's very important. Most of the time, the deals get broken because of the personality clashes rather than what each of the companies are actually planned to agree. So then, instead of going for a unitary approach of this is what I want, they tend to go with multiple options. You know what? If you pick this, this is the cost. If you pick this solution, this is the cost. If you want a cheaper one, this is what you get. If you want the best one for us is this is the value for money. So they go for options so that depending on the scenario, they can pick and choose what's best for them. So then they use objective criteria, which means even before they go for the options, there is no kind of subjective or qualitative information. It's all quantitative, which means they have done enough analysis. They know exactly what the numbers are. They even know what 10% discount means to them. They even know what concession means to them. They even know if they want to get a little bit more bottom line, higher the revenue, what's little margin that they could give up, etc. So they try to their best to get as many objective criteria in place. Most importantly, they go well prepared, because principal negotiation requires you to not just work on your deal structure, but you also have to consider the deal from the other perspective. It's slightly more research intensive, but it's focused on the interest of both the parties. Those are the fundamental principles. So I already touched most of this, but if you want to say separate people from the problem, the important thing is, regardless whether this relationship is going to continue or break, you consider each as partners. Now, in the small world, people move around. Last thing you want to do is just mess up a relationship, and you might think this just broken deal once, but it might end up breaking every other time because people always move around. So think of each as a partner, not an adversary. And as they also mentioned there, when they focus on the interest, this is about the common interest. We are here together to sign a partnership. We are here together to close a deal that's going to transform a local community, transform a new software, anything, digital transformation, you call it. But there is a common interest. That's the reason why we are here. Remember, in the sales cycle, you have come so far here. From the time you identify he or she as a prospect, from the time you present it, from the time you actually sign the principles, now you're very close to close the deal, and to close the deal, you are doing this negotiation. So looking back, you have come so far. So what are the common interests? Discuss these interests and stay focused on the solution. So that's the most important part of this. And again, when we mention multiple options, which I consider, it's not just about what you think, it's about the options collectively as well on the whole thing. Okay, this is what we believe. What do you think is the optimum solution for us so that both parties can agree? So we shortlist the promising ideas, and then we start to evaluate what's the best idea for each of those parties, and then we start to go from there. So again, the validity of the information that you want to put forward, if you don't have those validated, then you're blindly signing up something and blindly accepting the risk and to go for this to close the deal. So having objective criteria on the statistics, the legal precedent if something has happened in the past, and also what you have done yourself working with a client, thinking a long term, because you know the client better than anybody else, and say, hey, you know what? Is this something that we could give up now so that we could get back later? So everything revolves around objective criteria. So what are some of the ways that we can handle the obstacles during negotiation? If you have missed the objection, sales objection, I suggest you register and look forward on the different ways of objections. At the same time, what are the interesting ways that you can also approach to close a deal? Because all these things will go hand on hand. So suggest if you haven't done that webinar or you haven't done that course, register and review that as well hand on hand. So what are the essential deals of an effective negotiation? We already touched it. Remember, there was hard negotiation, soft negotiation. We picked up what we call a principal negotiation, and now we are in this midway, and we are talking more and more about the principal negotiation. So, first one, you define your absolute bottom line. Remember, the hard negotiator clearly knows the bottom line, where the soft doesn't know. Here we pick up the best from the hard, which is to define your absolute bottom line, so that you know if you're discounting 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, what are you giving up and what's the cost of you to deliver the same with low margin. If you looked at eBay and if you look at anybody else, that's like what we call an impulsive or electronic marketplace, where you just go and you kind of go and bid for things most of the time reactively or impulsively without knowing your bottom line. Yes, it happens. If you have had that experience, not far off in the real life execution, there are some tenders which are also used the e-marketplace, where you can clearly see the price is changed real time. So we already touched building value in the prospect's mind. We already touched, we don't need to put anything nearby where you are only going to negotiate with the decision maker. Always, always, always in the table have the decision maker. If the decision maker is not there, you just agree, okay, what can you negotiate? What is your limit? And if your limit is crossed, how are you going to get this signed off? The last thing you want to have is you're just talking to somebody who don't have the authority to accept your terms, and then it goes back to their boss or somebody on a very senior level, then time gets wasted. So understanding the envelope of what can you negotiate and who are the other parties who need to be on the negotiation table will make a bigger thing. In a normal world, the way it works is the project teams on both sides meet, they agree the core elements of negotiation, then they take something called red lines, which they weren't able to agree to their respective CEOs or their board and their commercial director or a law officer. And then the two law officers, then they discuss, the two CEOs then discuss and negotiate those things, and then it comes back to the project team and it happens. So on a daily basis, the project team negotiates. Then on a monthly basis, the other persons, the CEOs, they negotiate, and then the collectively negotiation might happen on months, or in certain cases, it could happen just on 2-3 days, where, we will negotiate on a day and we have 1 hour calls between our CEOs to agree the final bits and pieces. So there are many more of essential, and the more you kind of on the negotiation table, the more you pick up. Having mentioned, there will always be people who apply adversarial tactics on you. It's a kind of manipulation, but these people know what's best for them, and they will always try to push you towards something. If they were able to push you, and if they're able to get more out of you, it's just a bonus for them. But most of the time, people do try to get this away from you. So only you need to know how they are using the adversarial tactics. Some could be, as I mentioned, could very well be just the people, the way they approach. It's not the actual problem, it's the people's style of how they're approaching. But most of the things that we are going to share now, which are being considered as adversarial, is very normal to some of the people. Let's see what they are. So, number 1, false deadlines. So they pressure you to agree to terms before you are ready. If you are working for a IT BPO type companies, you will always know that the project deadlines are artificial. Nobody knows or except the client affiliate. If you're working on an offshore environment, you are always being given a deadline, which is not really the deadline, but it's just a preparation for you to do it. You're not even on the negotiation table. This happens on the work, on a normal side. So by having it in the sales side, coming back to here, if you are being pushed forward to agree to terms before you are ready, then you need to know, if you give in to fast forwarding through demonstration, presentation, you could later on be called out for covering up important details. Be prepared, ask necessary questions to check the reality of deadlines. Because the most important point of negotiation is you agree a deadline before which or after which nothing happens. and you agree once the deadline is framed up, this is the day where we need, it's a drop dead date where nothing should change after that. Stuck on the stone, then you start your negotiation and you build up what is the thing that you're going to agree 1 week before, 1 month before, or 3 days before, and how it's building up towards that, what sort of approval you need to go for, what that meant is, and somebody is pushing you to agree terms, you need to know how far are you on the sales cycle and why this is a deadline. If so, always ask them, what is it else you might need to go for? We cannot agree that, our governance doesn't agree, and you just stop it. The other way of looking at it is a person completely ignore deadlines and say, you want it to be having it signed off by, say, March the 15th, because your year end is end of March. So you want to close the deal, have it part of your year end, and then celebrate it part of year end. But then the other side, they delay the decision and they ignore the deadline because this is an artificial deadline that you put forward. How are we going to approach that? So, this is just an example. So find out the actual reason for the delay and follow up and politely communicate that your time is also important. What generally happens is sometimes, especially in private sector, because public sector, if you're working on a public sector, deals, it normally follows a principled negotiation timeline where your tenders are followed pretty carefully. But in the private sector, not necessarily it follows the same principled approach, because the decision making doesn't need to follow the general competitive thing. So they might change it, they might delay the decision, they might ignore the deadlines, they might move on completely. So save yourself by documenting all the communications, ensuring deadlines and key action points from voicemails, emails are noted along with consequences of any delays. What that meant is you might have given them a quote. The quote is valid for 28 days or something, but the project is delayed and 3 months later you reconvene, and if you've been asked to fix the same deadline, the same quote with the same thing that you agreed 28 days, you might need to change your position. So starting over in the middle of the negotiation, what happens here is you agree a position and then you are continuing the position and you're moving on. Suddenly, as you might have, if you might have attended the previous one, like the Colombo close, somebody tells, hey, by the way, one more thing I forgot to mention, and we might need to change that. In any case of one term being changed, feel free to reopen all the terms it impacts, so that there might be some dependencies. Both the seller and buyer needs to feel that there's a winner in the end, but you will always find halfway through the sales negotiation process, somebody is going to come and tell you, one more thing, things have changed from our side, and it's important for us. The payment terms, we agreed to be 45 days, but now things have changed. We would like to get it paid upfront. So what that meant, there is a massive cash flow impact, and you might need to understand what that means to you. So again, they might say, hey, by the way, what we originally planned to go live in the contract April the 1st, but now we want to push it back to June the 1st. Is it okay? So anything and everything. So again, so prices, which is a follow-up to that, and the prospect is actually bringing up new issues when you think they are settled. Pretty much the same, but it's slightly different in a way. Like the previous one, it's related to what you already been negotiated, whereas here it's entirely new. So again, this might look slightly theoretical, but in your own bid, understand whether this sort of things has ever happened. So in our case, it has happened so many times. So when we were working on a hospital deal, for example, we were working on the hospital deal, we were signing partnership with another provider, so that collectively we were negotiating towards an outcome in managing an outsourced arrangement with a big hospital here in London. But at halfway through, we got surprised that says, here we go, the hospital has decided to merge with another hospital. So collectively, what you need to do is you also need to cater the needs of the new issues that came out, which was not banked part of this whole deal. So even though it was considered to be relevant, but in between, the new issue meant that people have different way of working, and you have to go back and redo the whole thing again. So demanding price upfront. It depends on the smaller value or a large value. This is normal if you are a small and medium scale company to ask for it. Prospects may ask you for a ballpark price cost and then hold you to the lower figure. It happens all the time. Most of the consultancy arrangement where people will ask you, okay, you know what? I've given you 5 or 6 things to consider. Just give us an approximate range. And then they say, hey, you know what? This is what I want you to get things done. So moving on, how can you tackle this? It's important to have, as I mentioned, possibilities of high, medium, and lower priced options before you know what to be included in the sale and committing to a price. So this is where research comes up and multiple options comes up. So negotiating to the future. This is where a prospect use a possible future deal to bargain for the current deal. You know what? 2 years down the line, we are going to extend the number of buildings to another 3 buildings that we're going to build. And we want you to consider that part of this. It's a volume risk. But they're saying you will make 25% or 30% more revenue out of us today. Can you give us a discount? You never know. That might never happen. Conceding on the current deal could yield a large opportunity in the future, but consult your board and other stakeholders before committing, because he or she was promised you in the deal might never exist when the actual deal goes live. So what else? We look into some more adversarial tactics. It might look theoretical, but I just want you to kind of understand where you were or where some of your colleagues were there in this option. So creating an uncomfortable environment. This happens all the time, where if you're in a law firm or anywhere, they have nice big offices, you go there, but the meeting won't start on the right time, and they make the room hot and uncomfortable, and even sometimes sunlight comes into your eyes. They will sit in a way that you will be intimidated. There's not much break. They'll close the door and say, unless we agree this deal, it's a lockdown, we are not going to go further. It has happened so many times in the career, in my career, mainly because when the deal has come to a point where the deadline is very close and you have been negotiating for a far long time, and they say, hey, you know what, we need to get it closed, like it or not, by tomorrow morning, we need to sign it off, let's close it. So it happens. It's fully stressed environment, and sometimes they do it deliberately, sometimes they don't. But the more you understand, the more you kind of principal negotiators you might happen. But again, this is adversarial tactics, right? So you might need to observe whether this is happening to you or to your colleagues. You might not even know this is happening to you. That's a problem if you don't realize what's happening around it. So next one is suddenly losing interest. So you're halfway through the negotiation. Suddenly they say, hey, you know what? Let's park this and we will come back to that at the right time. Because it's important that we are interested on this, but priorities have changed. So we might need to look into this slightly later time. And why they won't give you the reason. But if it's not given the reason, then you might need to keep them aware. It's like, do not panic. Be aware that this could be a tactic. So ask the prospect what changed. Be patient. Sometimes they will be very quiet, because silence in itself is a negotiation tactic. It's important. And sometimes silence creates stress. Silence is a very important negotiation tactic. When things go quiet, obviously you will start to think worse. Oh, maybe I should make this happen. Maybe I should do the other way around. Even though they might not say anything to you, you might be thinking it's negative and you are starting to do. Again, outnumbering you, they might put a meant like, okay, only 3 people from your team can come, but on the other side, there'll be like 12 people sitting opposite to you. So again, ask for attendees' roles ahead of the sales meeting, and then say, if the deal is likely to affect multiple functions, it's sensible for the buyer to include his colleagues in the sales meeting. But if you do end up in a situation where you feel you're being bullied during the meeting, stand your ground and try to schedule a follow-up meeting. What happens is, this is where you might have 3 or 4 people in the deal. One will play a role of good police, the other will play a role of bad police, and somewhere in between who will not show any interest, and they do it in a way that they start to intimidate you more. Questions you might be talking, one will say, that's very interesting. The other will say, I don't think this will work. You know what, I think we are wasting our time. These are curveballs that will be thrown at you, And in a negotiation table, every little helps and every single tactic helps you to corner you. Prospects may even try to back down by faking a lack of understanding, awareness, assumptions, or expectations. So this is an interesting one where even after spending loads and loads of time, they will say, you know what, I don't really get it. Can you please explain one more time? I don't think this will work for us. So what that happens is, do not let the prospects not knowing to impact your terms, because sometimes people just wake up and they come for the negotiation table. So instead of them, A, they won't concede, but B, they played ignorance and say, please, can we go back to what we discussed? And please, can we agree one more time? And I don't understand this. We need to wait. So because of lack of preparation from their side, your thing is happening. But sometimes it's deliberate. Sometimes it's just the person who's opposite to you. However, since you are the expert, it's mandatory for you to spell out each step along with information on pricing, timing, delivery, etc. But believe it or not, people always chose to listen to what they want to listen, and then they play dumb whatever the things that's not important to them. So finally, we started to think silence, which you already talked about. Suddenly, if they're quiet, that's where things started to intimidate you. Be quiet yourself. It's pretty challenge. If I stop 30 seconds in this call, you might be wondering what happened. Is my connection's gone out? Maybe I muted myself. Something happened. So silence is very powerful. Stay silent after you started, especially people tend to be react when they say the pricing. When you say the price, just stay quiet. Don't try to react. Oh, I know that could be expensive to you. The reason it's expensive, they haven't even told you anything. So if they plead silence, you plead silence as well. Do not offer explanation or stammer. You may only be giving the material that can be used against you. Especially in a large contract, when they say the volume is going to change, what sort of discounts you're going to give. You might say anything that's going to come out of your mouth, but if it's documented in the minutes, it comes up, it's coming up. So silence is a very solid weapon, and use it at the right time wherever possible. So broken record. Prospects may sometimes bombard you with concerns, demand, budgets, limitation, or expectation. This is where a negative person will always come and say, I don't think this is going to work. You know what, the budget, what you are saying will not fit into my budget, and you want to get it done in 4 weeks. We want to happen in 2 weeks. I don't think this is going to work. So the broken record always happens, and they ask a lot of questions until you receive satisfactory answers. So you know, sometimes it's just the way they approach. Sometimes it's just the emotion that comes through. There's nothing related to the problem. It's just the person who's approaching it. He or she is just anxious. So it's important to keep asking, why do you say that so? Tell me more. Why can't we fix it? What's going to stop you from getting you there? All this stuff means you are getting to the right point. So final one is prospects may try to get last minute concession. As this is always happens, you know what? We can get this deal closed within the next week or so. But for that to happen, I might want you to do these 3 things for me. So do not drop your guard already and at the end of negotiation when you almost have a deal. Keep in mind, what impact will this have on my profitability and future deals? Because this is the last thing. So many times in the bidding negotiations, where the price point will always be solid, suddenly when you sign the contract, the price or the terms might be different. Then what happens? It's that last minute changes that you have agreed or the other person agreed that went to the contract, and the people might be thinking, hey, we never agreed that. Tell me the time where you agreed. Or remember the time where we finished the session and we were talking outside and I asked you, you just said yes. That's the thing that we have added to the contract. People can be cheeky. People can play any games at any time. So negotiation is unavoidable. Regardless of whether you like it or not, whether you think you are good at it or not, it's going to happen around you. But the most important negotiators tend to listen more than speak more. If they want to know, so they have everything planned, they have a clear communication, they only speak when they need to, otherwise they are silent, and they always aim for win-win. If the other person gets something, he will give you something, but that something that you might agree that you give up, hopefully, is something that they want. If that's not, that's where negotiation is for. Otherwise, it will be an easy game. So interaction, aim it for a long-term relationship, and always have to be ready to walk away if you think this deal is unprofitable, even at the very end of the sales cycle. Because negotiation sometimes be painfully long, and the reason it's been made long is for you to be giving up and make it work. If you are signing a multi-billion dollar, multi-billion pound, multi-billion rupees, anything, multi-billion euro defense deals or something, you would think those negotiation just happens in a day. No, it's deliberately made it to extend. Some cases because different stakeholders are involved and patience is key. But at some point you decide this has gone too much, so we have to walk away from the deal. Walking away is a powerful tactic. Only when you use it at the very end or at the right time, it will work for you. But if you try to walk away when there is not much stuff or not much data behind you, it will be perceived as an adversarial tactic. So that's it for negotiation. Before we move to follow up, if there is any questions, let me know. Let me have a look. Yeah. Okay, let's progress. So now we have got the, we have a sales in progress, and we negotiated it and we closed it, or we negotiated it and it didn't work, we walked away, or we negotiated it, it got delayed. Either way, follow-up is important. Follow-up is very, very important. And again, follow-up could happen anytime part of your sales cycle. So in a structured bidding or a procurement environment, where you have a structured process of you submit this, you get the result, you go to the next round, you submit this, you get the result, then you finally qualified for X, you submit this, you get a result. But in some of the B2B cases, that submit, get result, doesn't work. So you might need to follow up yourself. If it's a smaller deals, especially in the private sector, you might need to do it. But industry says that only 2% deals get stuck in the first meeting. So that meant that person, he or she, might know you for a very long time, might know there is a need, always knows that you are the right person to work on this deal, but just waited for the right timing to happen. Now he or she knows it's the right time. They just call you and say, here we go, Bhaskar, I just want you to close this for me. You know what, when can you start? It's happened, but as the number goes, it's very, very rare, because most of the time the prospect doesn't know they need this. Your biggest role is just to ensure that you shape that particular thing. Raised hand. Maybe there was a question. Do you want to? It's okay. Oh, got it. Sorry, I think I might have got it wrong. Fine. So so what that meant is you just need to take this person. 2%, if you're lucky, you get it there, but gradually you just need to make it work over the cycle. That's what we covered in the past 4 hours of lecture, where we just said, okay, follow through a sales process, and we are ending up finally here. So after the initial contact, follow up, here we go. I updated you. I submitted this proposal. Look, what do you, when can we actually get feedback on that? Or you formally did a sales presentation now, when can we get the results? When can we do this? Or you signed the contract now. Even then, you still need to go back and ask to follow up and say, no, you signed the contract. When do you want us to start? And just as a feedback process, why do you think you chose us for? So how to follow up? As they say, 80% of the sales happens after at least 5 follow-ups. People are busy, people have their own thing. You might be thinking that they completely rejected you and they're doing something else, but that's the way of life. Even though people know people need to do it, they might not need to go for it. Even in this webinar, there were like 18 people registered for the webinar as of yesterday. Today morning, that number increased to 24. But when you followed up, you can see how many people are actually on the webinar. It happens. People have their own life. People have to do that. If you need to be in front of your client, or you need to be in front of someone else, you just need to keep following up as many times as possible. And if you understand, you need to be slightly thick-skinned in a way, like you anticipate and then you be prepared for the typical objection a person is going to come for. So I have this question, which I'll answer at the very end. Okay, I'll answer that question at the very end. So what happens here is, after formally making the pitch, appreciate the lead, recognize and restate the pain points, answer any questions, etc. This is where, if you attended a sales presentation, we covered most of it over there. But what happens is, you just finish the talk in like 30 odd minutes, if it's 1 hour session, and then you just open up and say, hey, you know what, this is what we have done for you. You restate the pain points and you agree some of the things that they already said, they already agreed with you, and then you open up for questions, and then you just say, you know what, we are interested to make things happen. We are available to pick this project from next month. Will you be available? So after closing the sale, follow up to build and maintain, because what happens is, the relationship that you formed for with one contract, you never know how far this goes. In our case, we are 100% referral based business, which means a person who worked with us 4 years ago in a different company, one person has taken us to 6 different business. Every time he moves on, he takes us with us. So the relationship that you're building with the person, it's long term. It's long term. So that's respect you give it to them. So if you can nurture that sale, whether it happens or doesn't happen, it might have not worked for you on this particular company, but you have the relationship with this particular person, but it didn't work out there. And if you keep the relationship, he or she might be able to take you there in a different company, or when the situation is slightly manageable for him or her, she might be open it for you again. So the important thing is, how often do you follow up, and when do you follow up, and what ways do you use to follow up to keep the deal? So that's what we are going to cover here. If sometimes you just go blank, and if you don't follow, especially when the COVID crisis that we're looking at for the first 1 month, isolation is entirely new for us. We might be shutting down our brain, getting used to the thing, and then you realize, here we go, I didn't follow up with anybody. And then you're suddenly reaching out from cold. But even if you've done that in this 2-3 weeks, you're starting to do that, it still happens. But there is no right time or wrong time to happen. But as they say, if the more gap you give, the more times you need to follow up. So if you are following up 3 times, something happens in between and you forget, then you picked it up, then you follow up, you already missed the chain, which means it doesn't happen in 5 times, it might happen 6, 7, or even longer. If you already had some kind of interaction with the lead, but the interaction was not clear, definite no, then follow up as long it takes to get a response. Sometimes it's important to just keep chasing, regardless what other person is to think. Email has made it easy for us if you're not comfortable talking on the phone. And even interesting is use text messages, because people read, 99% of the people pick up the text messages, whereas not many people read the email. So if you want to follow up, the best thing is text messages. It's a brilliant way of reaching out, following up with people. But if that's not the case, at least at the very minimum, if you know the person, send them an email and say, hey, you know what, I just thought I'll follow up on this particular thing which we discussed a month ago. I will give you a call tomorrow 10 a.m. to discuss. So you already have sent an email, give a call, follow up. So some of the techniques here, again, it's kind of aligned to salesperson, but if you already have a sales follow-up principle, if you have a CRM, you schedule it, you automate the follow-ups. If it's an email marketing thing, you can set it up, and then you can keep the emails crisp and short. Or you could say, you know what, the reason we haven't touched base with you for a very long time is this. If you want to do a bulk group stuff, I'm sending you this email because you have worked with me in the past, or we have discussed in the past, something like that. Or you don't need to automate it, make it personal and keep it going. The important thing is stay human. Now with the whole video calling and other things that's happening now, this is the first time where so many people are physically seeing each other who they have been talking to conference calls for a very long time. So there is nothing stopping you from doing the following up. If you just pick up your own style, email, phone, text message, or a mixture of both, pick up the 5 or 10 people that you want to follow up. Because if you attended my time blocking webinar recently, I would have talked about the top 20 and then 80 farm club, which means in a quarter, I pick up 100 people who I want to follow up, and I use 20 people who's important for me that quarter, and I follow up with them on a weekly basis. And in that quarter, I follow up with the balance 80 people, so that I know at least every quarter I'm in touch with the key people. So that keeps you going, either an email or with phone or with others. So where we have now successfully completed the sales part of the Jumpstart workshop. We started with sales prospecting, pipeline management. We did the presentation. We have objections. We have deal closure. We have sales negotiations and follow-up. We have a masterclass 29th of April, which is next week, where we'll be pulling all this together, and we'll also be locking our certification exam. What that means is you are bringing all this principle together, you take a certification, and then we will certify you as a sales specialist. And you come out with a book, and you come out with an activity thing as well that you can start to use part of that. But part of the Jumpstart program, we will very quickly move to proposal related thing, because there are tons and tons of resources available inside Scribble, but we're picking the elements that's going to help you to be a full stack person. So from value propositions, then we'll pick up capture, then we'll talk about a little bit more bid related stuff. And if you're leading a bid, what can you do to help a bid? And most importantly, marketing elements comes in there. Finally, LinkedIn conversations. Either way, next 8 weeks, you're already in 2 weeks now, we have completed 4, and in another kind of 2 weeks, we will be completing the rest. 2 to 4 weeks, we'll be completing the rest. And in between, you will also start to see the masterclass that's going to come and hit you here. The masterclass is slightly detailed, it's slightly more specialist. It's 2.5 hours long, and it will include breakout rooms, activities and stuff. Plus, it also comes with the workbook. So I'll leave you there. Would love to have you with us there. But in either way, let's continue the journey here, and let me answer. The self-care program is something that's been very popular. We have 72 people at the moment in the self-care program. If you're furloughed off, it's something that we go for. We structure the future selves. There are so many activities that we do there. The first 2 lots are already fully booked. There are spaces in wave 3 in mid-May if you're interested in joining, but we are collectively bringing all the parts together. So I'll end it there, and I'll open up for questions.